If you watch my breakdown of the December Democratic debate, you'll know that I said that I thought it was probably the best debate that we've seen so far, but that doesn't mean that everything about it was perfect. In particular, there was one moment where Joe Biden was asked a question on the issue of climate change, which used a little bit of Republican framing. In fact, Bernie Sanders even calls him out on it. So let's watch a clip of that, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Vice President Biden, I'd like to ask you, 3 consecutive American presidents have enjoyed stints of explosive economic growth due to a boom in oil and natural gas production. As president, would you be willing to sacrifice some of that growth, even knowing potentially that it could displace thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of blue-collar workers in the interest of transitioning to that greener economy?
The answer is yes.
Tim, in all due respect, your question misses the mark. It is not an issue of relocating people in towns. The issue now is whether we save the planet for our children and our grandchildren. The issue, as you should know, what the scientists are telling us is they have underestimated the threat and severity of climate change. You're talking about the Paris Agreement, that's fine. Ain't enough. We have got to, and I've introduced legislation to do this, declare a national emergency. The United States has got to lead the world. And maybe, just maybe, instead of spending $1.8 trillion a year globally on weapons of destruction, maybe an American president, i.e. Bernie Sanders, can lead the world. Instead of spending weapon money to kill each other, maybe we pool our resources and fight our common enemy, which is climate change.
Thank you, Senator Sanders.
Okay, so there are a number of things which can be said about that clip. First of all, Joe Biden's response there at the beginning, the answer is yes. That was a terrible response. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine if Biden wins? I promise you, if Biden wins, that will not be the last time that we see that clip. We will see that clip again. It will be blasted all over the airwaves in coal country, and Donald Trump will never let you forget about that line, which he said, oh my goodness, if you want to win, that is not how you frame it. And Bernie Sanders, did a really good job there for calling out the moderator. And his answer then is more correct than Joe Biden's, not just substantively, but also strategically, right? By pointing out, hey, look, we actually do, by specifically pointing out that, actually, look, we can create jobs in the process, which is, of course, essentially the Green New Deal. And what Bernie Sanders, by the way, was referring to when he said that some of the scientists are now saying that we initially underestimated some of the threats of climate change. One of these studies that I always like to point out when I talk to people about this issue is the Global Climate Project. So they did a study which found that if we want to keep to our goal of keeping below 2 degrees Celsius of warming, which is essentially like pretty much where we need to be if we want to keep our ecosystems like in part, sustainable. We might be able to go a hair over, but not much more over that. So if we had started emissions reductions in the year 2000, so that ship has sailed. But if we had started in the year 2000, we would have needed to do annual emissions drops of roughly 2% per year. And that could get us there, and we would be able to stay below that 2 degrees of warming. But if we start now, like if we start literally today with emissions reductions, which is not likely, but if we started today, it would require a roughly 5% drop. And again, this is annual, so much more difficult. 5% is going to be difficult for any country, but globally, oh my goodness, that is going to be cooperation on a whole another level. Now, let me give you the really bad news. If we wait 10 years, only 10 years, that's not a whole long time. 9%. 9% per year annual emissions drop. Now, I'm not going to play with you at all. That is beginning to sound a little bit pie in the sky. I'm not saying it would be impossible to do, but just like the difficulties politically, getting other countries to cooperate, getting developing countries to cooperate, where literally people are very poor, and it becomes very sort of colonialist to come around and say things like, you need to reduce emission. You know what I mean? There's all kinds of serious difficulties which come into play with it. Now, I love how Bernie Sanders absolutely calls out how much money that we're spending globally around the world in military competition with one another, when really our only global our real global threat is climate change. Like that is where we should be spending our money, right? Like I mean, just the United States alone, we spent something like $6 to $7 trillion in Iraq, $2 trillion in Afghanistan. Like this is a lot of money. And let me tell you a winning political strategy. So I just said that Joe Biden there talking about how, oh, of course we need to get rid of their jobs without specifically talking about giving them new jobs. Was bad political strategy. Let me tell you a good political strategy. Literally just go around saying, we're going to bring our troops home and use that money to invest in our country here. We're going to stop building other nations and we're going to build our nation here. This, by the way, this is not original. This is essentially Donald Trump's message. It was America first. Now you can criticize America first because there was a lot of like anti-immigrant sentiments built into it as well. But there were aspects of it which, you know, like were which weren't terrible, like Donald Trump's impulse. And I do believe, by the way, I do believe that this is his natural impulse. His impulse to say, well, why are we in other countries? Like that's actually a very popular sentiment, even among Republican voters. I said Republican voters. I didn't say Republican elites, and even Democrat elites. That's a whole different thing. But that idea of, look, why are we overseas building other nations when we have homeless people at home? You know, when there are homeless people sleeping on the streets. That is a sentiment which, done right, can be very compelling. It does tap into nationalism, and I know that some people on the left are kind of worried about that. But I think that channeled properly, a properly channeled nationalism can be like, I think that you can properly channel it, is what I mean to say. I think that you can properly use that kind of framing and really get positive things done. I think that you can turn around and say, look, I want to bring our troops home and we're going to use that money to invest in invest here at home. And while we're at it, why not put solar panels on the roofs? That's what I mean when I talk about investing. That is the proper invest framing. I do like, cuz look, a lot on the left will just use the phrase, we need to cut the military. And I agree with that. Personally, I do agree with that. But there's a lot of people out there who might not know the details of just how much money we're spending. And they hear cut the military and they're like, well, hold on, then who's going to protect us? Because they might not know the details of the fact that, you know, the United States spends as much money on the military as the rest of the world combined. But when you hear the, you know, statistics like that, when you hear those numbers, it's kind of like, well, that's fair, you know, like it becomes much more persuasive to people for them to be like, okay, I see. So we're going to bring our troops home and we're going to use that money to invest in, you know, invest in technology, invest in infrastructure here at home. And, you know, while we're at it, hey, look, the green technology, that's the new stuff. That's on the rise. So we should invest in green technology so that we don't have to rely on foreign oil. We can, you know, have all our resources produced here at home and we're more safe. That is a message which I think really will appeal across the aisle. Now, when I say appeal across the aisle, I don't mean to the Republicans in Congress who are completely bought out by corporations, but I mean to your average person. I highly doubt that you know, people are out here seriously hacked out believing that, oh yeah, we just need to be overseas spending our money, you know, having troops. Because look, a lot of people know people in the military. There's a lot of people out there, including myself. My dad was in the military. Know people who served, and you know, a lot of people don't want to see it, don't want those people gone all the time, having to go out and fight wars. So honestly, this is the strategy which is going to be a lot more effective, and I really like that Bernie Sanders calls them out on it. So that's the video. If you liked it, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.